Lyritia, it's so nice to have you here. I am going to love this conversation. I already know this. It's about my passion, and what I absolutely love talking about is parents and supporting their children, if their children are neurodivergent or not, or if they might be. So it's lovely to have you here. Tell me a little bit about you.
Carla, nice to do this with you. Like you said, I also think we're going to have a blast. Looking at all the things you've already discussed, there's so much that I relate to with what you're sharing. From my side, I am a founder of a tech company called Flowminder, but for today's purposes, and more importantly, a mother of a child with ADHD, and plays around on the autism spectrum. I always use the word play around, and I'm sure you can touch on that a little bit because one of the things we'll talk about is that it's not a score. You're not X amount autistic. You play around on a spectrum of color, right? So I think what we want to achieve today is really to share just my experience as firstly a mother and how the whole journey went with finding out that your child has challenges. And then also the fun part of learning a little bit more about myself and my own challenges and how we go through that in life.
I love that. And I love playing around on the spectrum. The spectrum, I mean, there are thousands of autisms, which I don't think a lot of people even know. We were taught as clinicians that there's classical autism, there's Asperger's syndrome, and then there are related conditions. And that really has evolved. So that definition of autism has evolved, luckily. And now we do know that there are various types of autisms. And you could be showing signs early on, or you could be masking until you're an adult and you might never be able to even pick up that you're on the spectrum, but you do know, I think innately you know. So as a mom then, do you want to talk about the moment of the diagnosis or navigating through it?
Yeah, sure. So our story starts quite young. From a young age already, there was things my child struggled with. Now, as a mother, and if I look back on it, it's always nice to look back on it and you're like, okay, maybe I should have seen that sooner, or maybe I should have done X, Y, Z. But you're always in your own eyes, right? You're viewing things out of your own perspective. And as a mother, when people used to tell me you need to look at this, you need to focus a little bit more on this and things like that, I used to have the attitude of, no, everybody's child is like that, or he's catching up. He'll crawl a bit later, or he'll do XYZ later. But yeah, so the first time we really started picking up, there was some challenges that he was facing was when he started going to kindergarten. And I think the teacher every now and then would tell me, listen, he really struggles to sit still. And I'd be like, yes, my boy, at least he's active. So I just go on with it. And I'll never forget the first time she sends me this video and all the kids are sitting around the circle doing story time. And there in the corner, I see my child going under a table and kind of like rolling around, putting his head down, sitting under the table. And that was the first time I was like, okay, maybe there's something that we need to look at. And then diagnosing is a long journey. And I'm sure maybe you can share more about the actual steps of going through a proper diagnosis. But for us, for a long time, we were like seeing different types of therapists and unfortunately got so many different viewpoints. At the beginning, it was all sensory. They were just talking about his sensory issues and maybe struggling with his sensory regulation. And then as time went on, you kind of start building on top of getting clues what's going on, what's really happening, and you start building on the diagnosis. So it wasn't like one moment that somebody really said, listen, okay, XYZ is wrong. It took time. But then as he got older, we did the proper testing, and then we got a 10-page report saying, okay, this is what we're working with, and this is how we're going to support him. I think it's very important, and sure you can also build on that, as I am very happy that I started at a younger age to intervene and that I didn't just ignore it. Because if I saw the impact that early intervention had with him, it's a lifesaver. And if there's any message to today, it's really don't ignore it. Don't be oversensitive, but don't ignore it.
I think that's beautiful. And also just maybe not to be afraid of the potential of receiving a diagnosis, because with knowledge comes power. We know this as adults, the more we know, the more we can actually manage it. And with an early diagnosis or early signs, even if it is not a diagnosis yet, but early signs, we can start intervening. I think what I would like to say, a couple of things, is one of the things is that the parent is the expert. You always know when something is up. Don't forget about those signs. Don't ignore them. When you feel like, okay, well, this is different, put aside that really scared part. And I know I'm sorry to say this, but the scared part of you to say, well, my child's different. And that's okay. I mean, it's a long road to walk, I think, as a parent when you notice that your child is different, but to try and support them, and to say, okay, how can I support them from a parent? Because when you said about the professionals having different opinions, that's such a familiar conversation that I have with parents, where they say, well, the OT, the occupational therapist, is saying that I need to do a lot of sensory integration. The speech therapist is saying I need to put him in front of an iPad. My therapist is saying that I need to spend time with him. What do I do? And I think as a parent, innately what your child needs. So kind of go with that. But yes, early intervention is always great. I mean, like we know as adults that the sooner we kind of address whatever it is that pops up in our lives, the better. So I think that's a really good message for people.
Yeah.
What are some of do you think, the misconceptions of ADHD and neurodiversity that you found as a parent that's out there?
Well, I think the biggest one, and I know people come from the best place and they really just do it because they care about you. Well, firstly, as soon as your ADHD with the hyperactivity, right? So I'm from South Africa, and a lot of my friends and family would have just used to say, he's just being a boy, he's just being a boy. And for a long time, that's just what I went with, although I could see that there's not a controlled play. It's not like he's controlling his hyperactivity. It is controlling him. So that's the misconception, kind of like he's robust, he's supposed to be that way. The other interesting one I always find is when, as soon as I would mention autism to somebody and they say, but he looks me in the eye. And I'm like, but what does that necessarily have to do with? It's not like all autistic kids can't look you in the eye, or he must be amazing in math. And I'm like, unfortunately, he's not so great in math. He's not the Rain Man. He has different skills and abilities, but it's again not all the same, right? And then there's hurtful things. I often hear people. I listened to a podcast the other day. I won't mention names here, but that it was brought on why this is happening, what brought it on. So he has ADHD because he had trauma as a child, or he has ADHD because I didn't let him play enough outside. He didn't roll around on the grass enough. Those type of things as a parent, when you hear it, immediately turns into guilt, which then becomes this whole thing that you kind of have to work with. So the misconceptions, I think, is firstly that people don't really understand what is happening, why it's happening, and the signs of what ADHD and autism exactly looks like. And again, like you touched on it, that this conception that if you diagnose your child, your whole world is going to fall apart, and now you have a special needs child to take care of. When that's not the case at all. It's you learning how to support your child, to get tools to help your child.
I'm connecting with them on a level that they understand and that they actually really get
Yeah.
what you're trying to do. I love what you said. I'm sorry about the podcast though, because there are still people out there that has such a misconception, or have such a misconception about what autism is, what ADHD is. Just to give a bit of background about me, I don't think I did that. I always forget to
Mm.
do an intro. I am a therapist, and I'm currently doing my PhD dissertation specifically on the neurodivergent population. I see parents, but I also see adults, and I have a company where I work with kids. But I think the most remarkable thing in my industry is that I'm neurodivergent myself. So I was diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety in my 30s, and I'm in an assessment for autism at the moment. And I think that makes a big difference that we're now finding that there are clinicians that's working in this field. And obviously, I went in this field because I feel like I can actually connect with my clients really well, um, because I am neurodivergent too. But that I feel is a great step towards a better understanding, is to communicate with adults that are autistic or that have ADHD and just learning from them. And I mean, speaking about that, when we work with our kids, there is such a massive hereditary factor in there, right? A genetic factor. So most of the time, when we communicate with our parents, they start noticing, oh wait, but I also did this as a kid. Like the example that you said, with your child going under the table, there were probably moments where you thought, I don't know, I'm assuming now, but if you think back in your childhood, were there also signs that you might have been overwhelmed from a sensory point of view?
Yeah, well, if I think back in my childhood, one of the biggest things, and you can build on that as well, the difference between boys and girls, and how that looks in neurodiversity. I remember people telling me, she's so shy, or she speaks so softly, or she's just like so scattered. She's a bit scattered. And the first thing I could relate to with my son when he received his diagnosis was like when I was in a crowded room or at school and people would be talking and talking and talking. I wouldn't necessarily participate in the conversation because there was so much noises. There were so many people at one moment talking, and me going, oh, but that person is saying this, and this person, oh, and then, but what does that have to do with that? And then start thinking about my netball match, and then I'm kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
And I think it looked like I was disengaged in conversations quite often, but it was 100% me not being able to keep track of the conversations that's going on. So yeah, I mean, when looking at him, I mean, my poor husband, he looks at the both of us and he's always like, okay, Lyritia, you go support it because you probably know best what's going through his mind. I relate to him so much in that way. And in a way, that's kind of a blessing, is me understanding a bit of what he's going through.
That's lovely.
Yeah. Also, just it makes it difficult sometimes, like if I have to support him, especially in executive functioning, that becomes a problem sometimes, right? Because my executive functioning is kind of not my strong point. So if I have to remind him to bring his shoes and his toothbrush, he's going to bring his toothbrush, and then I hope he remembers the shoes. Maybe somehow we'll fool each other on.
You could be each other's accountability buddy. You could say, look, I
Yeah,
also have the same issues. Like, if you could remind me this, I'll remind you that. That's awesome.
yeah,
But it's such a nice way to co-regulate. And I think that's also a different way in psychology, at least, that we're working with our clients. We're not teaching them, which I never liked in psychology, where you go into a session and you're kind of saying what the person should be doing, but you're rather saying, asking questions, you're staying curious. And I think that's a beautiful way of interacting with neurodivergent individuals. It's like, I'm going to share with you, so kind of co-regulation too, but I'm going to show you and share with you where I'm at, what bothers me, so that you feel more comfortable in sharing what bothers you. So as a parent, I think that's one strategy that I would highly recommend, is
mm,
to open up with your kids, like telling them, look, I have these issues. I struggle to cook, for example. That's a personal issue. And that's also the executive dysfunction, right? If I look at a recipe that's like 15 steps, there's no way I'm going to order something because it's way
Mm,
too long. But if
yeah.
I close it and if I, if I just do one thing at a time and I kind of like, oh, okay, just one thing. And then I'm going to take a break. And then I'm going to put some music on while the pot is on for 10 minutes because then I don't have to wait because we hate waiting, right? So I'm going to put a pot on and put some music on, my favorite song that I can listen on repeat because that's kind of a stimming thing. And then I can do the next thing. So I'm breaking it up into smaller pieces, but I'm also telling my child, look, I hate this, but this is
Mm,
how I get through cooking. Let's find a way for you to get through your homework that isn't excruciating. So
yeah.
that's maybe one part of that we can look at. Um, I don't know. There were so many things that I wanted to ask you, but I wanted to also maybe just see like how to. We did touch on the stigma that's out there, but how to avoid that. And as a parent, like what do you do when you get negative feedback from others? Maybe it's family members. How do you avoid that?
Well, you're trying to, it's a very difficult one because, firstly, you're trying not to label your son. It's like, or your child, I went through this stage where I would not discuss anything about my personal life and my own personal experience because I kind of felt it was a invasion of his privacy in a certain way. But then I realized, that's what everybody is doing. And because everybody is doing that, we're not breaking these stigmas. I live in a very interesting country because I'm in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai, and there are so many different cultures here. So you've got the Indian population, Emiratis, British, everybody, South Africans, everybody, and it's so interesting to hear everybody's point of view out of a cultural perspective of how they see neurodiversity from the countries that they come in. So if we don't actually talk, then how are we really supposed to find solutions and to find that support group type of setup? It's really difficult, and I think it's really important for a parent to try to find a support group where you can have discussions and not isolate yourself completely and try to figure this out on your own. And again, not ignoring it. If there's one message, it's just don't ignore it. Have the discussions. Educate yourself. Very important.
And yeah,
Yeah, no.
with the support group, I think that's a brilliant piece of advice because you want to speak to people that are in the same or in a similar boat to you. You don't want to speak to somebody that's going to kind of gaslight what you're saying and say, no, it's fine. He's a boy. He'll grow out of it. He's just active. He's just a South African little rugby player in the
Mm,
making. You want to speak to somebody that says, look, my kid was there 5 years ago and that's what I kind of did. Maybe you can try these activities with him, interest based, get him into something that he really likes to get that, to exert that energy so that he doesn't feel like it's always like this pent up bottle that's going to burst. I think that's a lot of times with boys. Now, you said earlier about the difference between boys and girls, and yeah, we almost kind of skipped through that, and that's such an important point to go back to because with girls, our diagnoses only happen much later in general. So I was diagnosed in my 30s because I was also very similar in school. I got good grades. I got in trouble, but not because I was hyperactive or naughty, just because I was young and a teenager. So I was masking a lot. And there are different types of masking. Like for females or women, we camouflage. So we kind of fit into social norms and we do what other people are doing. So it doesn't look different. Whereas with the boys, they don't mask that much. They do mask, but they don't mask as much. So they will stand out because their
mm,
hyperactivity won't be in a group where we will follow the group. We might drink more and start smoking at a young age and like say random things in class, but our the friends that we choose are also doing that. So we kind
mm,
of like we herd, whereas we herd in groups where with the boys, they would just shout out whenever. So they're not really following those social cues. And that's one of the reasons why girls are only being picked up later. and they also feel a lot more anxiety. So, well, the feeling part is the same, but the showing part is different with girls and boys with anxiety. So
Yeah.
they will show that they're shy. Yeah, sorry, you wanted to say something.
No, I mean, it's just so interesting. And especially as the kids get older, that is just something for me that I always think about is how are we going to support a 16-year-old child and the symptoms that change, because the hyperactivity turns into maybe masking, turns into depression or anxiety and all these things. So you always have to kind of keep your eye on it and have these discussions.
Yeah, and the support group will do wonders for people.
Mm.
Finding people that you relate to is really important. So even with looking for advocates, so neurodivergent advocates out there, some of them you'll be able to relate to, and others you won't. So I would find the people, like finding your tribe, really finding people that you can say, oh, that sounds familiar, and speaking to them, because yes, it does turn into there's a really high rate of neurodiversity and depression. So neurodivergent individuals having depression too, because we're constantly suppressing what we're thinking about, and that sensory overwhelm, whether it's an emotional overwhelm. And we don't want to mention it to our loved ones because it seems like they don't go through it. So we're constantly suppressing, and I don't want to elicit unnecessary like danger out there, or a warning that's not justified. But there are a lot of my clients that have chronic illnesses because they suppress so much of their physiological signs, and they're like, oh, but I'm feeling, I have IBS, but it's fine because I just need to do this presentation, everybody else is doing it, so I need to be able to be okay with it. I have a rash because it's hot, but that's okay, it's just me, it's just I'm oversensitive. And they're suppressing to a point where our bodies just can't hold it anymore, and then it
Yeah.
leads to other things. So that's something in the future that I would say it's important to listen to your body. And if you're the parent, if you're if you're overly anxious about something, there's a reason. Give yourself some space. And the same with your kid. Like if they show signs of this is just too much, it probably is.
Yeah.
And they probably need some accommodations.
Yeah, and I mean, that segues nicely into emotional awareness, right? So, working for me personally, I work a lot with my son to try to understand what is a emotion, and you'll probably build on that. It's never just one. We have multiple emotions at one single time. And how does he identify and relate to that emotion, especially in the neurodiverse space, because they're just not so they're not so good at that, right?
Yeah, and there's a reason, right? So 50%, there was a paper that came out, one said 44%, and another paper said 50% of neurodivergent people have alexithymia, which means they struggle to mention, to note what emotion they're feeling. So they're feeling it, they just can't describe it. They can't say, oh, this is anxiety. They can say, my heart's racing, I'm sweaty, but what does that mean? I don't know. So
Yeah.
we need to teach them in a different way what that emotion, what those physiological signs could lead to, and what it means in an emotional manner, because otherwise they're just pushing through the whole time.
Yeah.
So I think that's important with the emotional regulation. The first part of regulating is becoming self-aware. So we need to help our kids, and we need to become more self-aware of those signs, and then discover what that means. So if it is your emotions, if it's your sensory system, if it's your communication style that's different, your conflict style is different as a neurodivergent individual, how do we understand it, but also how do we advocate? So how do we tell our mom, when I smile, because one of my autistic kids, when they're angry, they'll smile. That actually means that they're angry, because they're overwhelmed. So they don't know how to express it. So they're like smiling. And then the parents like, why are you smiling? And that makes them laugh because now, somebody is shouting at them and it's also overwhelming.
No.
But it's a difference of expressing.
Yeah, and very socially, emotionally aware of others is also something that's very important, right? So, like you say, if my son, for example, is very sensitive about other people's feelings, even even though he's not so great with his own. But as soon as he thinks somebody might be angry with him, or he's made somebody sad, there's a hyper awareness of other people's feelings, and there's internalization then about it's all my fault. It's something that I did. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
and it's interesting, but it's also it's kind of heartbreaking because there's so much emotion that he's feeling because he's seeing and feeling all of that as if it's his own. And I see this even with my older clients is they can read a room so well. So if you look at the 8 senses that we have, like we have the typical 5 that everybody knows of, and then we've got interoception, which is our internal sense. So if we're hungry, thirsty, do we need the toilet, those things. And then we have proprioception, our sense of self in the world, in space. And we've got vestibular, so our movement and our balance. And then the 9th sense that I always say is like our bonus sense as a neurodivergent individual is our affective sense. I mean, it's not written up yet, but it will be, I think, where we can read a room. So we go into a room and I have this thing where I always thought that I had like a spidey sense where I'm like, something feels off. Like, I don't know what it is, but I can't put my finger on it. And then you also, with that, you get like a lot of people that would tell you their stories. And it's because they may be just feeling comfortable with you because as a neurodivergent individual, we're quite open and we speak, we get a lot of, too much information, TMI, but that also opens up other people to be able to relate to you and speak to you about their stories, and then you take it on.
Yeah,
That's why a lot of neurodivergent people become therapists because we're like, well,
I can help.
we must be good at it.
Yeah,
I'll
that's so
take it.
funny. Yeah, I do exactly the same. Like with I'm entrepreneurial, so as soon as somebody shares ideas, I'm like, oh, okay, let's do it. We can do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. It's so interesting.
Yeah, let's become partners. I'll help you with this. I know somebody that can do this.
We don't need paperwork. We're fine.
Yeah, we're impulsive too, which makes us like super fun to be around.
Yeah.
But I don't think people see what's going on inside, the internal struggles, like you say with your boy. He's taking it on, and it doesn't look it. Probably he looks like he's having fun or he's having a lot of friends, but he feels so intensely. And it's also it's the difference between cognitive empathy and affective empathy, right? So neurodivergent people, and especially autistic individuals, they have a lot of affective empathy. I got it wrong once, so I'm like double checking. Affective empathy, where they feel super intensely, but their cognitive empathy lacks. So they might think this person, I don't know if he's angry or sad, but I'm feeling very intense emotions. So once we note to them, look, I'm really sad about this, and it's not your fault, because we need to make sure that they know that it's got nothing to do with them. But this is how I'm feeling, and I'm going to be okay. Like, as a mom, I would say this to a little kid. Like, if he sees that you're upset, to first mention, look, it's not your fault. You did nothing here. It's just, I'm upset about another person. It's out of your control. It's out of my control. I'm just going to go and lie down for a bit. You can lie down with me. Just kind of to show them that they don't have to take the world's sorrows on their shoulders. I think that could help a lot.
Yeah, and I'd love to get your viewpoint. I'm now thinking about emotions and dopamine. So sometimes I find that he could try to create conflict if he needs a dopamine hit. So if you engage in that moment and you give him that conflict, it's what he's been searching for. Because you can go into that as well. There's obviously a dopamine imbalance when it comes to kids with ADHD. So he needs that. And if you especially if you yourself are now struggling with impulsivity or controlling your own emotions, you have to try to kind of stay away from that and to, like you say, take a moment, engage differently.
Mm. That we have a dopamine shortage, right? So it's been noted that ADHDers have a dopamine shortage. That's why we're always dopamining. So we're always like searching for those dopamine hits, and that could look like anything. It could be in any shape or form. So it could be scrolling on our phones, like just like the that kind of like stimming behavior where we're just like going through dopamine searches, and it can be online shopping. It could be watching Netflix shows. It could be searching for a high emotional impact conversation. So it could be like, I just need like something. I need something to kind of stim on. And we can help our kids to search for exciting and positive interactions, but they don't know that that's what they're doing because they're still very young, right? So they don't know, oh, I'm seeking dopamine. But if we teach them, look, these things are going to give you that feeling, like these are the good things that will give you that feeling, then they'll understand it more. It's all about understanding. We want to know, we want to figure stuff out. So ADHDers want a manual in bullet form, and individuals that are autistic want a manual that is comprehensive, whichever kind of profile your child is, or maybe it's a combination. So maybe some parts he needs it bullet form and some parts he needs a big long manual, but he needs to understand why he's searching for that. And then he needs ways to get it. So yeah, I think the dopamine searches is so important, and also seeking flow, right? So I don't know, a lot of people have probably heard about like seeking creative flow. So when we as neurodivergent individuals go into flow state, we kind of look like we're not there. We look like we're zoning in on something and zoning out the world. And that's one of the beautiful things about being neurodivergent, but it can also shut down everything else. We can forget to go to the toilet. We can forget to answer people. We can forget to eat. We can forget about the very important meeting that we have at 10 o'clock because we're in flow. So we can create those flow states and have them kind of limited to a certain amount of time, and then have like a vibrating alarm going off on your phone saying, or on your watch saying, okay, it's time to move on. Um, and then maybe know that you're going to have some more of those later.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, that flow state, another thing important with that is making them aware of the people around them in that state, right? So my son, for example, goes into fact mode, like, do you know what's the biggest animal, the smallest animal, the fastest animal? And he'll just go on and on. And then, but he's sharing this information with another person. So he needs to find a way to break that cycle where he goes like, oh, okay, this person has now had enough animal facts. I have to move on from that. But it's amazing to see them in that state because they are so happy. So we experimented with so many things. Sport, tried to find him sport where he can go into that state. If your child is autistic, if your child loves reading, all these type of things. But you have to find what works for your child.
Exactly. I love that he does that. My partner is autistic, right? And he goes into fact mode all the time. So he tells me about like 100 facts a day, and maybe one will stick. Like one of the facts that I heard the other day with him is that they used to have in the Roman era, they used geese as their guard dogs, basically. So because geese bite, and I thought it was one of the coolest facts. So every time he tells me, I have the same expression. Oh my word, that's so cool, because I've got ADHD, right? So I forget it. And then every time he says it, he kind of gets into like a little bit of a stim because he's like, oh, she's gonna love this fact. I know she likes this fact. So he tells me this again. But I think the point there that I wanted to make about like fact sharing is to find the people that are going to enjoy the same conversations that he likes. So find those clubs, and you've probably done this, but like find, maybe it's like a robotics club or somewhere where you can go and he will find similar people that he can share those facts with. And then they can do like little research projects together, and they can present that. Because if he's going to find friends that don't have the same interests, that could lead to him being excluded from the group, because they're like, oh, but he always talks about facts and we want to play football. So we need to make sure that we help him find those friends. I mean, I do group therapy, right? And I work with autistic women in one of my groups, and we go through the same thing that we're talking now about kids, where we say, okay, well, we need to find friends that have similar interests, because otherwise we're just going to continue masking. And this is an issue for individuals that are older too, because they feel like they have to have 20 friends, whereas neurodivergent people probably have about 3, if that, friends. We have fewer friends. We need to be okay with that. We're not that typical. We get overwhelmed with too many people, too many people's perspectives, too many people's emotions. So we need to be all right with the way we interact.
And again, 100% important for parents to understand their children in that sense. Because if you're going to be the mom that thinks, oh, I'm just going to arrange 100 play dates, and by play date 87, he's going to learn how to socialize, you are going to burn your child out. So
And yourself.
Always staying, and yourself, and stress yourself out completely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the good thing about the advocates these days, is that they are talking more about, look, we grew up and now we know that those parties were overwhelming for us. So we can definitely learn from that. And if we're looking at ourselves, again, like I said, the rates of the hereditary rates of neurodivergence is really high. So there's no one statistic out there, but it ranges from 50 to 90%. If your child is on the spectrum or neurodivergent, as a parent or both parents, that's like 35 to 60%, I think. The parent will also be both parents will also be neurodivergent, but definitely one is there's a high likelihood that one of the parents is going to be neurodivergent. And you're fine. I mean, you've gone through life.
Yeah, I can just imagine how many men are going, no, it wasn't me. It wasn't me.
Well, yeah, no, I'm not going to comment on that one, but I think it's definitely worth to be completely honest with yourself and say, look, I actually struggled with quite a lot of these things that my kid is struggling with. And like you said, it opens up that possibility of truly relating to them authentically. And
exactly.
that's all the kid wants.
Yeah, it's the support and the understanding. Yeah, 100%.
Exactly.
100%.
What about medication? Did you want to talk about medication in your own life with your child?
Yeah, look, I think it's such a sensitive subject. My comment on that would just be, don't ignore the possibility because you're scared of what you don't understand. There's a lot of, again, stigma out there about it. There's the theories that if you put your child on medication, they're going to be drug addicts one day. But there's no one solution fits all. So just in the one hand is I truly believe that some kids need it. It makes a difference. I do believe that some kids can't use it. They just can't find what is needed and it doesn't work for them. But the important part is, again, don't internalize that as a parent and have your own opinion without seeking more knowledge about it. And be brave, do the research, find out. And yeah, I don't know what is your experience in out of a medical standpoint, because as I understand it, it is so useful, and it does actually create behavioral changes that has a long-term effect on the kids in a positive way.
Yeah, I don't have too many comments on there because it is so individualized. So I think I definitely agree with you, is that it's a parent should seek support from a clinician, from a psychiatrist or a pediatrician, and go with your gut too. but make sure that it's not fear-based, like you said. So make sure that you're open-minded when you go into the conversation with the clinician, but it is still your decision as a parent. So if you see side effects that are not great, then make that call as a parent. Do what's best for your kid. I have another family that the doctor switched the medication, and the child is now starting to have seizures. So that's not
Yeah.
good,
Yeah.
obviously. So they need to go with their gut there, and they are going with their gut, and they're saying, look, we're going to stop all medication for now. But others have gone and they're on medication and they're doing wonderful, their kids. It's just helping them to cope. I spoke with Dr. Temple Grandin, who's an autistic advocate, and she was saying she wouldn't have been able to go through puberty if it wasn't for medication. So it really depends. I think it is very a personalized approach works best, and listening to your gut, your intuition, for
Yeah,
sure.
don't ever do it because somebody told you to do it. If maybe, I know sometimes schools push it a little bit upon parents. Never do it because of that or because somebody said you have to do it. But then again, also know, like you said, I know that the emotional damage that sometimes happens for kids when they cannot control their emotions and their hyperactivity is just as bad. So, it's really controversial, but it is very personalized. Don't ignore it. I think it's important to maybe just touch on the process, because people need to understand there's a lot of psychological testing before you go to a psychiatric method and go into medication. I don't know if it's the same in all countries, but in the UAE specific, it's not you go to a GP and you get medication. There's a whole process. So don't be scared of it. Go through the process and then make an informed decision at the end for yourself and for your family.
Yeah, and that's a good point to just pause on for a second. So if you do feel like your child is struggling in a social setting, maybe they're showing signs of high anxiety, maybe they're struggling to just complete tasks like homework assignments, they're coming home and they're always forgetting things at school or vice versa at home, and they're always in trouble for forgetting things. That's kind of like more of a typical sign of an ADHD boy. But with our girls, they might be really quiet. How was school today? Fine. And they're not mentioning anything that's happening. And after a while, you realize, okay, but they're just not communicating with anyone at school, and maybe the teachers pointing out that they're not interacting with others, or they are, but they don't look happy. All of these things. I mean, as a parent, you would know, okay, something is up. I'm going to just go and speak to my GP, get an opinion. And if you feel like that is an opinion that you don't agree with, get a second opinion, and then maybe go and see a pediatrician. And the process is long to get a diagnosis, but as soon as you start the process, you can already educate yourself, like you also said earlier, and just make sure that you bring in strategies. And I don't know if you want to talk about a few strategies that parents could bring in already, but I can also help with that.
Yeah, I think you're the expert. I'll share a few things or big picture things that I think are important. I think it's a Dr. Russell, but I'm not going to quote exactly who gave me the best advice about you take your child's age and you subtract 30% of his age, and then that is where you can expect your child to function from. So that mentality for me immediately was like, oh, okay, so just because he's 10 years old and all the other kids are already doing X, it doesn't mean that is what I should expect of him. That immediately lifts that expectation thing that you have on your child constantly. And overall, drop your expectations. Everybody is different. Your child doesn't have to be like everybody else. Sometimes my child doesn't pick up his shoes. Do I have to now shout at him every single time? Or can I realize that it's a bigger deal for him to pick up his shoes than it is for somebody else to do it? So if he's had a hard day, I can let it go. I don't have to make a big thing about it every single time. Awareness again. It's awareness. I love breathing exercises, but I know when to do the breathing exercises. It doesn't help I do it in a moment where he's overwhelmed or he's angry or he's in the moment of things. But I try to do as many as I can beforehand so that he has a tool that he can implement when he goes through that, especially as they get older. Yeah, strategy wise, I think advocating for your child, it's not a strategy, but it's just an overall advice. Be the person that's always advocating for your child. So go to school, explain to the teachers, listen, he needs a fidget. He needs this type of fidget. He needs movement breaks. He needs to sit in front of the class. He can't be in a situation where everybody's going to bump him around. His sensory overload is going to go crazy. And you need to be aware of these. So it's for you as a parent, your responsibility to have a list of these things and then to go advocate for your child wherever he goes, at school, at soccer practice, at rugby practice, wherever, at ballet. You have to explain to the people so that you give him or her the best chance of actually succeeding in what they are doing.
I love that. I love the focus on what happens before the emotional dysregulation. And I think that's probably one of the most important points. There are lots of strategies that could help. Again, it is quite personalized, but there are basics that you can do. I can always send you a link of like a list of strategies, and we can link it below this talk too for parents to just kind of download. But one of the things that I would say is if you think about like how to implement those strategies before. So strategies like having a low arousal tone, not being too emotional, but the way that you communicate with your child, because of what we said earlier, they take things so personal sometimes, so if you say, oh, I can't believe you did that makes me so upset, that I'm really disappointed in you. I can remember every single time my parents said that to me, that word. I'm disappointed in you. I don't remember them shouting at me, but I remember them shouting, but not as clearly, but with the disappointment, that cut deep. So those kind of things, if you're using a low arousal tone and a low emotive tone, you can it's kind of how I always speak. It's like a deep, slow voice that calms your child. It also calms you. So again, we're focusing on the co-regulation. If we're in a calmer state, our child will be in a calmer state. They pick up on our cues. It doesn't matter what we say to them. I'm calm. They know you're not. So if you calm yourself and you say, look, I just need 5 minutes before I deal with the breakfast that you just threw out, that's better than reacting and pretending that you're calm. So I would say to really regulate your own emotions is important, and then co-regulating with your child, being honest with them, like, look, I'm a little bit upset, but I'm going to give myself 5 minutes. And then, so the low arousal tone, low emotive tone, being super predictable, with your child, telling them, look, today is gonna be different because it's raining, we can't go outside. So we've got 3 options, or what are 3 things that you would rather do indoors? So you're giving them that choice. A lot of our kids have PDA, which is pathological demand avoidance. It's an awful way of saying that we've got a persistent drive for autonomy. We want to be independent. We want to make our decisions ourselves. So if we tell our kids, you can do this or that, they know that we're trying to trick them. But if you say to them, look, we can do anything inside because it's raining outside, what would you like to do? It's a better way for them to feel like they're in control.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So that focus, predictability, routines. Our ADHDers hate routines, but we need it. Autistic individuals love routines, so we want to create those routines and structures for all of our kids. And this is kind of good for any child, right? So I don't think it's going to hurt if everybody is on a routine. Everybody knows what's coming. Everybody knows that there's a difference. You said about the sensory toys, the fidgets, that's important. Movement breaks is important. Dual processing is an issue for our kids. So where they have to sometimes look us in the eyes and listen. So when you said earlier, some of our kids don't struggle with making eye contact. Most of our kids don't, but if they make eye contact and they need to take in information, they might struggle. So my partner, for example, he would look away when we're having an argument because it's too high impact emotionally. So he has to take in exactly what I'm saying. In the beginning, I was like, look at me
Yeah. That's
having
so
an argument.
interesting. Yeah. Look at me.
So,
Yeah.
so
Mm.
having that as uh something just happened. Okay, now I can hear you again. Having those things in place before we there's a bit of a sound echoing now. I think it's your earphones. If you're moving them, maybe. Yeah, better. That's better.
Okay.
Um, if they move, then it's a big feedback. But it's okay. I think it's better now.
Okay.
So if we look at sorry, I know this is a bit theoretical, but it's quite interesting, I think, for parents to know this. We always want to create central nervous system and autonomic nervous system safety. So we want our kids to feel safe, content, and in control.
Mm.
And how we do that is we need to create safety for them inside of their own bodies. So having that sensory that sensory system that's calm. And then we also need to create safety in their environment. And that means structure, routine, they know what's coming, predictability, those things. And then the people in it. So we communicate in a way that's not vague. We tell them exactly what's happening. And it's you, your husband, and the family. No, there's a massive sound, Lyritia.
Yeah, I
don't
gotta
know what it
just
is.
change it. Yeah. Better?
Right now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. Yes, yeah, I can hear you.
Or better?
Better.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about
Um,
that. Did I
no
distract you
worries.
there a
So,
bit?
yeah, I'm like, what?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like,
sorry.
oh, bird.
Yeah.
But so yeah, so just going back to it's basically a conscious brain state model that I always show parents that we need to make sure that our children is in executive state when we're teaching them strategies. If they're in
Mm.
survival mode, where they're just trying to figure out if they're safe, or if they're in emotional mode, where the limbic system kicks in the brain, and they're just trying to figure out if they're loved, they won't be able to use their prefrontal cortex, which is the executive state of our brain, where we can learn things. So looking at that, those three systems, you need to figure out if your child is feeling safe, if they're feeling loved, and then we can teach them something. And you have to kind of go through those steps before you implement strategies.
Yeah, I think that's, for example, why it's so difficult at the beginning of the school year or anything that's massive change, because they're already lacking that safety. Suddenly everything is new and
Exactly.
suddenly everything is crazy. So to then go and try to implement a million strategies definitely is not the time to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. That's
yeah.
it. And we usually tell our kids, like, what can you learn from this? Like, look at me, what can you learn? And it's like, no, this is not the time. I mean, think about it, like when we go through a breakup, for example, when we're younger, we don't want to learn from the relationship right after it happened.
Yeah,
We want to first feel safe, we want to feel loved again, and then we're like, okay, well, it wasn't that great anyways. So I
exactly.
think it's the same with our kids, yeah. So that,
Yeah.
I think, is in a nutshell what I would say to parents. Make sure that we implement those strategies before, and then when our kid is going through a meltdown, a shutdown, or even just when they're agitated, just to show them that it's okay. These are the things that they can go and do. They don't have to learn anything in that moment. We can go back to that moment later.
Yeah, I think one of the first things I learned to say to the school the most, for example, is what happened before. So they would come to you and say, this happened, he did this, and then my question would always be back, okay, but what happened right before? And you start trigger tracking that system, and it's amazing how many things you will pick up, and that is how you actually identify triggers and ways to support your child.
Yeah, exactly. Looking
Yeah.
at the antecedent. And I mean, there's like that's the one thing that I absolutely love about behavioral therapy. I don't love everything. I'm quite against a lot of the strategies and the ways that they work, especially ABA. But one of the things that I do like is to look at the ABC model, so antecedent, behavior, and consequence, and making sure that it works for our kids. Like what happened before, what is the behavior, and is the consequence actually increasing that behavior? And then
Yeah.
making sure that we change what happens before and the way that we implement a consequence or what we implement.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe as a closing topic, if I think back of all the different types of therapies, and you could maybe share what are the options there for parents, not judging it, like you're saying, I'm not judging any type of therapy, but know that certain type of things are there to support your child. Like you say, like trigger tracking is not there to manipulate behavior. It is there to understand your child. And you have to intervene quite early with your child. That's definitely recommended. But try to again figure out different ways of doing that, because it's not a one shoe fits all type of scenario. Certain things cannot be trained into a child with ADHD or autism. They will never, for example, have executive functioning. You cannot train that into the. You can build systems. I think that's how I understand it. Is try to build systems, but you cannot train them into suddenly having that skill.
Yeah, you can't change their brain structures, right?
Hmm.
But with executive functioning, they might have excellent executive functioning skills in the things that they like to do. This
Oh,
is where
true.
parents think this is where parents are like, well, why can they focus so deeply in their interests and they just can't clean the bathroom or pick up their shoes from, whatever. It's because they're really not interested. So we need to go with that interest based, and also the executive dysfunction, right? With things that they're not interested in, their attention lacks then. And that's what kind of triggers the whole system to fail. And then they mask. So it's a whole process. But I would say that, yes, definitely to focus on their interest. And in terms of therapeutic modalities, there are a lot of them out there. Yes, none of them are going to be perfect. So I would say make sure that you're comfortable with the therapist. That's very important. And train the therapist in your child, because you're the expert as the parent. The therapist is not. They work with a lot of different people. I work with a lot of different clients, and I always ask the clients to help me guide me in their therapy too, because they need to be in control. The child needs to be also in control and making decisions. It needs to be interest based. They need to be able to give choices, and not just do you want to do a crappy activity or do you want to do a nice activity? Not those choices, an actual choice. And they need to really be there for the kid. So there are behavioral therapies that I would say could work, but I would say there definitely needs every child, every person needs a form of being mindful, and it doesn't necessarily need to be meditation, but playing mindfully with your pet, playing mindfully with the sand, eating mindfully the snack, going for a mindful walk, because we need to teach our kids, our ADHDers specifically, to just take a moment to not think and worry about the future and become anxious, or think constantly about the past. And, that's where depression kind of hides for us. But we need to be present and just take it slow. Breath work is amazing for that when they're in the mode, and you can do it in fun ways. They can also teach you. I have a client that teaches her mom how to do breath work, and then she records it on like a little YouTube channel, which is super cute.
Cute.
But yeah, find interests,
Yeah.
that the kid likes.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's different things work. I realized the other day, for example, that he has a way to. I used to meditate with my eyes closed, and I thought, yeah, do that. Close your eyes and meditate. And he could meditate, but he could only do it with his eyes open, and he needed a lot of things to look at the same time. So it was quite interesting. As soon as I could activate his eyes and he could stare at a lot of things, he was like, "Oh yeah, now I get it." So yeah, very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, even with meditation, like you said, right? There's immersive meditations where you hold the phone and it starts vibrating. That's the only way I could meditate in the beginning. Because my yoga teacher would tell me, okay, you just need to just count, whatever the little dots or whatever, and I was like, I can't do this. This is actually annoying me. And then when I heard about immersive meditations where you hold the phone and you go into the forest and it starts vibrating, I'm like, oh, this is super exciting. Like, where's the phone going to
Oh.
vibrate again? So it's so individualized, but your kid will know. They will guide you. So I think listen to them, listen to your own body, share what you're feeling, be quite authentic and raw with your child so that they can see, oh, okay, you're also struggling with some of these things, so that they also open up, especially with the little girls. So they see, oh, okay, mom's also struggling with this. I can open up more and tell her that I had a bad day or whatever the case is. But anyways, I can talk for hours with you.
Yeah,
I
we
know that
can,
we're
we
out of
can.
time. But
No,
thank you so
awesome.
much for your time, Lyritia. This is awesome. You're such a good mom to do all these things. And
Thank
also
you.
your app. We didn't even talk about this, but you've created a whole app for your child, and I think this is worth mentioning.
Yeah, so I built Flowbinder to help my child within his school and with his own mood regulation, executive functioning, and basically to create this communication system between the teacher, the child, and the parent. We discussed trigger tracking earlier, so I really wanted to have the input from the teacher's point of view, and but I didn't just want her view. I wanted to incorporate my child's own perspective into that. So FlowMinder is great for that. It helps you with emotional awareness, teaching the kids about their emotions, tracking, trigger tracking, like we discussed, and then fun rewards and executive functioning to help them to actually remember to pack their shoes. So yeah, we'll
Awesome.
link that in the description. We'll also link your stuff for the people to find you and get
Yeah,
your
but
get
that's
your
awesome.
support. Yeah.
That's awesome that you're bringing in the child. I think it's definitely the element that we've been missing in my field. We didn't ask the kids. We would just implement things. And I remember clearly my supervisor saying, like, you can just do this because you can make them talk. And afterwards, I thought to myself, I can't make somebody talk. That's a horrible thing to say. So, yeah, I think it's amazing that you're bringing in the kids into their own emotional regulation. I think it's going to help them a lot when they're adults too. So, well done for that.